I think we all, again, I think it's all in our heads. So if we literally just type out a couple of sentences for each one, if nothing else. And then I think Frits, and I'm sorry I haven't read it, but I think Frits sent us also some comments which are in here as well, so we can go through those. But let's go, Daniel Martin, do you have anything
I know it's
to
under
jump in first?
my name, but I think it's more your report. It's more the pertinent.
Yeah,
If you wanted to go through it.
okay. Great.
Yeah.
So-
This one that I
Oh, Frits wrote.
You can drive if you want. Oh, sure, okay. So, this is the one that's printed here is the version that Frits did some work
Okay.
on and sent
Yeah,
out.
well, maybe for a second, like, what I thought a little bit about how it would be presented to council.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen with these things is you get this endless list of little bits and pieces that we recommend would be changed. So then I thought from, the purpose of the first page that I wrote is more how we present it.
Okay.
So that, for instance, we make, you first have in the preamble basically what you wrote, right? But, I mean, that's good to repeat, definitely. And then there's the second item says the secondary street bylaw is part of Bowen Island's land use bylaw. The interpretation of the secondary street bylaw is based on the land use bylaw definitions. The definitions are very limiting, restrictive, inflexible, and do not enable the Housing Advisory Committee overarching goals to be implemented. So it makes people aware that you have to focus on those, otherwise you really do not know what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay.
So then if I keep going through it, then it says that we would first basically want to say to council, first take a look at the definitions. Because then you know what is a secondary street, what is this, what is that, and people actually talk the same language. Okay? So then after that, and I don't know if some of these pieces are presented at the same time to council, but I would think we go really sequential in a way that people can follow what we have to report. Right?
Okay.
So then there is the land use bylaw, right? And so part one is the interpretation and definitions. Part two is the general regulations. And these are the items that I believe we will respond to because they affect residential, like secondary streets and all that to the maximum, right? Those are really the key ones. So then we're already in three. If you look at the bottom there, at the part 3, that is actually 3.54. That is the secondary streets. That is the one that I would say we would focus on for the first submission. And then you get part 4. Now we can't really do anything about part 4 until we have some kind of agreement what would affect what the definitions are, and secondly, what the recommendations are for the secondary streets. Because the moment you go into part 4, you're talking about all the zones. But you can't really say, well, this is what we wanted to change in the zone, before you kind of know what your tools are, so to speak, right? So I can give you an example. If you would agree, as a committee, that secondary streets could be addressed on a per neighborhood basis, then what you propose for the zones is different than if the conclusion would be, no, it has to do the same. You see what I mean? So there is a sequence, there's a logic in the way we would present it. So then if you go, the very bottom of this first page is actually when it goes into the land use bylaw. And then instead of giving a long list of things that we would recommend, I thought it's kind of better to give some rationale, first an introduction, and then give an example. So then you say, well, for example, look at this. And then I think you have council's attention. You say, oh, really? You know what I mean? And then you say, well, if you want to read more, well, fine, go to the appendix. It's kind of the middle page where you say the appendix A. Then go to something that's attached, which the interested reader can then see more of the recommendations in a particular section of bylaw, right? So then, and then the next thing is the same approach for the general regulations, right? There isn't much there, but item 3.54, secondary suites, happens to be part of that, right? So it's actually kind of key. So then, so again, I would say for Bylaw there are some general recommendations from the advisory committee, which I don't know if they're sitting quite in the right spot, but then it goes into all the items that are under general regulations, which is all, part 3. And then if you take the secondary suites, then it goes into the secondary suites and it follows exactly the format of the bylaw as we addressed in the last meeting.
Yeah.
1 to 8, right? And so then, if you read through that, it basically says what we recommend for the secondary suites, which follows very much Robin what you did.
Okay.
But I would take out what can be in an appendix, you know what I mean? So that it doesn't get too much into
Bogged down.
unclear. We just focus exactly on those 8 items, right? And then then it's definitely we're already at least. I don't think council can handle more than maybe the definitions, to be honest, in one meeting, or maybe it's the definitions and part 3.54, which is the secondary suites, right? But then the actual bylaw, part 4, the zoning bylaw for each neighborhood, I would definitely leave that as a separate submission, because I think that it's affected by the first part.
I agree with leaving
Yes.
that to a later stage. I have some questions about how this report is going to go forward and who is putting the report forward. Ordinarily, it would be the staff liaison, who is Daniel. So would this be your report, Daniel?
I think I'm more than thinking it would be the committee's report,
With commentary from you, or?
potentially commentary from me, but yeah, I guess I thought because it has more sort of independent backing, it's from the committee saying this is the recommendation to council, you know, and in some ways it could be, you know, it's like council, committees can make recommendations to council, but this would be more fleshed out, so it wouldn't just be like, recommend council that you amend the secondary suites bylaw to do something, but then it would have like the actual backing of the report there, so council can get into it more. Because sometimes I feel like if it comes from me, well, it could just come from me normally, right? As opposed to saying, well, the committee's worked through it, this is the committee's thoughts and not just Daniel's thoughts.
Do you agree with the recommendations here? I mean, I want to know if we're
Yeah.
talking
Yeah,
as a
it's just-
council,
yes.
does staff support what we have come
Yeah.
up with?
And I think, yeah, as we go through like the secondary suite stuff, I think I definitely agree with some, there's like, somewhere like no brainers, like we've talked about the 40% or the, with bed and breakfast, and I'm like, okay, those seem like ones we wouldn't have to think about more,
Right,
right? And other ones I think are ones that would say, okay, we have to think about more or do more work in.
right.
And I guess that's maybe how I separate them a little bit, is like, you know, if it comes with like stage 1 is like, just do these quick ones that'll solve some problems now, while we, and not as like, that's the end of it, but, you know, this is step 1 and this is step 2 or something, which is like a bigger conversation about.
So,
Sorry.
so which elements do you see as the ones that do need to be given more thought? I mean, I should back up. I'm going for low-hanging fruit this first time out, in part because we've got concurrently the regulations for short-term rentals in the mix. And if council were to support some of the recommendations, some of the no-brainer recommendations here, that would be a factor in deciding whether the short-term rental regulation made sense. And it also would affect, I think, the public's sense of whether the short-term regulation makes sense. If, for example, you can have a bed and breakfast and a secondary suite, you're going to look at those short-term rental regulations differently. So I think there's some urgency in getting the low-hanging stuff before council pretty quickly, because Emma was hoping to get the regulations passed by November. So to come back to my other question, if there's the no-brainers, which are the ones that you see as really needing more time?
I think it's allowing 2 suites. I see as more, like we want to do consultation if people have more opinions on. Even relaxing parking on it, I think again is one that, so it's kind of like, what would we want to consult with people more widely on and say, okay, maybe it works in some cases and not others.
Okay, and we just allowed 2 suites at council through a rezoning application.
You just were introduced the application and referred it to this committee.
Right, okay, so it's coming out
Yeah.
later.
But Maureen, there's some general ideas, right? So council may agree with the general idea. That doesn't mean you have to move forward with it right away. And then there could be, Daniel could have your report attached to it and say upon request from council, these are the things that can be implemented the quickest. But if you have a general idea, right, that the number of suites may vary on a neighborhood basis, and you give the example which I gave you, that you can have 1 suite of 1,000 square feet, or maybe 2 or 500. Now in the code, would you rather have 2 or 500 or 1,000? That may be a very simple question. But then council can say, oh yeah, that doesn't really, it's because now you look at it differently, and I think some of the comfort actually comes out of the idea that it can be done on a neighborhood basis, that's one. And secondly, that everything that could possibly be confrontational goes through staff. It's conditional, right? So that it's not like suddenly all these things start to happen. No, you have a big filter there, which is your own planning department. And then the ones that are conditional, they may have to go to council anyway, right, for final approval.
Is the no minimum lot size, would you consider that to be no-brainer or more thought?
More thought. I would. I would think, so this is something similar to what Frits has drawn up, because that's what the housing committee recommends to council, is consider these changes. Then maybe my role is then to step in and say, okay, we're bringing Emma's, land use bylaw changes for short-term rental. Well, at the same time, we'll fold in a couple of the ones we talked about, that relates to bed and breakfast, because it's sort of applicable, and then the 40% thing, and say, okay, at the same time, we'll do these, because we don't think that they are, they don't take separate thought, whereas in other things would.
Okay.
Even the minimum lot size, I just feel, because we adopted it 2016, I think, and there's a fair amount of consultation, right, and discussion about the change, and so changing it again, I think we need to do a similar amount of discussion about it.
So what's the timeline for, so I know we've got short-term rental, that's kind of a fast track thing we need to consider. Do you have a timeline you were going to submit? Thanks, Frits. You were going to submit, I think, a report, the follow-up on secondary suites, so that's what we were kind of trying to track to make sure we were in line. Is there still a timeline on that, or, I just want to figure out, again, because this is, I'm sure there's a lot of great information. I have not had time to read this, because it just came through. I don't want us to rush a lot of these great ideas. I don't want us to, panic today, because we have half an hour, and it's just not enough time, right, to actually robustly go through this and create a comprehensive report. So I want to figure out how do we get, because there's some really great stuff in here, how much time do we need to create a really full, robust report that's very clear, legible to council, reflects all of our ideas collectively as a committee. I don't think that's going to happen today in half an hour or even in the next couple of weeks. So I wanted to kind of figure out, like you said, we do a very short, almost like a memo even, or a very short report for these low-hanging fruit that I think we're all in agreement on. They're not contentious. We could debate right now which ones are in or out, but do we just do a very short report that's relevant to council for these few things that we talk about, making a note that we are working on a more full and robust report that we hope to have out soon?
So maybe then one way to think about it is, so I guess in terms of my timing, I'm looking to bring to the APC in their October meeting, land use bylaw update stuff.
Okay.
But that's not specifically to secondary suites, but it's height and lot coverage definitions and some things in our land use bylaw that don't work and whatever else. But maybe instead it's, you have on the agenda later the short-term rental policy referral. So maybe it comes out of that, and so it's the Housing Advisory Committee is recommending to council the short-term rental policy, these changes, and that, with any bylaw amendments to amend the short-term rental regulations to blah, 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 blah.
That's good.
Okay.
And so, you know, like, whereas the Housing Advisory Committee is working on more extensive, and will be reporting, you know, late 2019, but when you do the short-term rental policy, you should include these things in it. Maybe that's one way just to capture the couple points and then
Yeah.
say something bigger is coming.
I think that's a good strategy.
That allays a fear of mine that the work that we do, bearing in mind a short-term rental,
Yeah.
that Daniel feels it's absolutely with everyone's blessing that one doesn't trip over the other, and
Mhm.
because we're going to have to work these. They're happening. We've got to work these in conjunction. So
Yeah.
They're very
I'm
much
willing to hear
related
that.
anyways. I mean, I don't think it's a
Yeah.
hard sell to say this is about trying to increase the amount of rental.
Absolutely, and I'm just relieved to know that, okay, we've got someone riding shotgun here to make sure that we're not, with good intention, doing something which is really making life hard for the other, because we're going to have to mesh these together, and I think it can only, basically, come from Daniel's office advising us,
I think
advising us all.
I think in the long run with the secondary suite regulation, what council would need to see is a revision struck version, you know, of the bylaw, just showing exactly where the changes are. But the narrative, council may get lost in, but if we put the wording of the bylaw with the rationale provided separately, I think that would work in terms of presentation.
Yeah, but I think this is the Housing Advisory Committee, right? So whatever we submit should still have to focus. Because, you know, for instance, if you look at the mayor's standing committee of the community lands, their thinking is different. So, and then I think that it can not all be, can give the same message to council, it won't. And council in the end will balance that, and I think Danielle will bring it together, so to speak. So like, I mean, we have two councils on the committee, which is great, right? But on the other hand, the committee should still be, to some degree, at arm's length of the council,
Yes.
saying if you do these things, yes, it would help housing.
Yeah.
Right? Agree,
Yeah,
right?
no, I get
Okay.
it, yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so what I'm thinking we do to move forward, let's see where we get to in the referral that we have from the short-term rental thing. So let's look at that. And like when we get to it on the agenda and see, and then we can pull this back out. But to not drop this report entirely, one thing that you'd said, Daniel, that I think was, so you're going to a different committee, the APC committee, to talk about land use bylaw.
Yeah.
Do you have the date for that meeting? And is it, I assume they're open meetings, like would we
It's open meeting.
be okay to attend?
Yeah, it's the 21st
Of October?
of October.
Okay. Monday. Is it an evening or a daytime?
It's a 7 p.m.
7 p.m., okay.
And we publish the agenda the week before.
Wednesday,
Yeah. So assuming that I can complete the report by then you'd see the report as part of the agenda. And if I haven't completed it, then you'll see that it's not on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that might be something we can just, whoever is interested on the committee, like I'm thinking particularly Frits and I, we can keep an eye on if that's coming up, because it might be interesting to go and attend, because we, as the Housing Advisory Committee, might also have input in having a discussion,
Yeah.
might be useful.
They also take like public comments if you can't attend, but you can just send a letter and say, these are my thoughts on it.
Right.
You can thread to just, so people don't have to
Will
come.
this be dealing with the conservation development work at all?
I think they're doing that as well as a separate, so they have a subcommittee that's looking at conservation development, and this is more, we're supposed to look at like the technical fixes and stuff, yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing. And then the next thing being, I think we need to continue to do more work on this report, whatever happens with our review and feedback to council on the short-term rental thing, which will address a couple of things. So I'm wondering if we maybe have like a little subcommittee meeting or something. I find it's better when we're in the room together. I think that's easier. So maybe we can make an action item for staff. That whoever wants to attend, why don't we try to find a time in the next month when we can sit together and actually work through this and then we can all take time ahead of time, read through it, and then come prepared and sit and workshop it together. Does that sound like a good idea? Okay. So I don't know. Let's set a time after the meeting's done. We'll try to do that before we leave today, because I don't want to. I know we've got lots to get through. So. Okay, so that's a wrap, I think, on that one, and ongoing things to do. So.
Can I suggest, Robin, could we do the referral, the 375 Cardina referral, just because it relates to secondary suites as well, and
Yeah,
the applicant
we
is
jump
here as
that
well.
one forward.
We could-
And I'll do
That's
the,
7.2.
okay, and then so 5.2, the land use bylaw review again, I think let's make that a subcommittee workshop meeting. Does that make sense? And that can all be kind of dealt with, trying to create this report and something comprehensive. And I like the idea of aiming for the end of the year. I'd love it to be sooner, but just knowing all of our capacity and how quickly things move, I think it is gonna be more of a, take a couple of months to do. Okay, so these are subcommittee. So yeah, let's move up, sorry, 7.2. So
Yeah.
let's jump ahead to that one. And so this is a referral for 375 Cardina Drive. Are you doing a little?
I'll do
do
a little,
something?
I have the
Presentation.
council presentation that I gave.
Okay.
I'll focus on.
And so just a reminder, because we haven't actually got a lot of referrals
Yeah.
from council as a committee, so could you just remind us, so you're gonna present to us, and then we as a committee are giving you feedback? Like what's, maybe I should ask, what is council looking for? You're just looking for our feedback from our lens as a
Yes.
housing advisory committee,
Yeah.
and we're gonna give them our feedback. And then, again, we'll kind of come back to a couple of our thoughts that we've already been going on how these things fit in.
Yeah, very good.
Yes, maybe that's a good starting place is, I don't even have referral in a while. So essentially, we've received a rezoning application. So on Monday's council meeting, we introduced it to council to say this is the broad picture of what the rezoning application is. And at that meeting, council referred it to committees. And then we directed staff to draft an amendment bylaw to make that change into effect, to bring back to council with all the committee comments for consideration of first reading. So essentially, to do a rezoning, you need an amendment bylaw to amend the land use bylaw. It needs to receive first reading and second reading, go to a public hearing, third reading, and adoption. And typically what we would do is we go for referrals after the introduction. So we introduce it in terms of, this is the application, what kind of things should go into a bylaw, do you support the application? And then typically after council has received the bylaw and given it first reading, we would refer it again. So you'd see it again, and the idea of that is saying, okay, you saw big picture what it is. This is what it actually has related to in terms of the bylaw that would make the changes come into effect. You know, do you still support? Did that capture your comments? Any other things you've thought about since then?
So really, our comments here are to you, and then you will incorporate them from multiple committees into your report to council?
They are to council, so typically it would be, you know, that the Housing Advisory Committee recommends council.
Okay. Do the X, Y, Z.
Yeah, or, you know, it's like,
consider.
or the Housing Advisory Committee supports the rezoning application of 375 Cardina Drive
Okay.
with these comments and, you know, or with these conditions or whatever it may be.
Great, thank
Or
you.
it does not support, or, yeah. So 375 Cardina Drive is the Bowen Island Marina. So that's your marinas. So, just by way of background, so the property was purchased by a new owner, I believe last year, or earlier this year. And the new owner, in trying to, in part because of the business license bylaw and in part because of looking to do renovations, has encountered several things where the existing Bowen Island Marina does not comply with our land use bylaws. So they have applied for this amendment bylaw to bring existing things that are not in compliance into compliance. So it's not looking for, it's not an application to drastically change the Bowen Island Marina, but it's to say we want to continue with how it has been operating.
Make it legal.
Yeah, and there's two components of the application, so I'll go over the commercial side just as an overview, but really the Housing Advisory Committee, the referral was specifically for the residential component of the application. So this is the marina side of it, is where the pictures are. But so the property itself is this outlined in blue, so it encompasses two zones, so it's in this Village Commercial 2B zone, and then the property continues into this SR2 settlement residential zone up here. So if you've ever been to on the dock, there's a path that comes up to essentially what, you know, is a private house, but it's part of the same property as the commercial marina piece. So the SR2 zoning regulates this house that's here. And as we've talked about, the SR2 zoning allows accessory residential use, and we say you can have not more than one accessory residential use permitted on a lot. So this house in the basement had two secondary suites within the house. So this suite on this side received at the last council meeting a variance permit. So the suite itself was, I think, about 115 square meters. So it was larger than the 90 square meters that was allowed. And so when they came to get a building permit, we said, well, we can't give you a building permit, it's too big. So they applied for a variance to allow it to be larger. They had explored, okay, what are ways we could shrink it to be a smaller size, and given the layout of the basement of the house, it's, it's not possible short of like closing off a room, or 2 rooms, I think it was. It wasn't, we couldn't divide up the house that way. So that variance permit was granted, but there was also a second suite within the basement. So the rezoning application would say, can we have to reinstall this secondary suite in the basement of the house? And that's essentially it for the residential side. Then the village commercial side is looking at, it allows land-based marina facilities, which goes into exactly what it is, but it's takeout food facilities. And the buildings and structures allowed on the dock are limited to what was done in development permits in 1989 and 1995. Specifically, it says you're only allowed those buildings and structures. And so at that point, there were these 3 storage sheds, and since then, there's been a sort of infill between the 2. There's been a little addition on the side of this one, done without permits, and which can't be permitted until the zoning has been amended to say you're allowed additional buildings and structures. So the rezoning application, allowing additional secondary suite in the SR2 zone, was the focus for the Housing Advisory Committee, amending the land-based marina facility or some way to have seating within the food establishments, and then additional buildings. And I'm just noting this one that our building inspector had building code concerns with the infill building connecting the 2 that were storage sheds in terms of fire separation and whatever else, so that noting for council, we say, okay, you can have additional buildings that either work would have to be done or be removed. And so council at the meeting referred it to the Advisory Planning Commission, to the Community Economic Development Committee, and the Housing Advisory Committee. And in the staff report, I sort of outlined what the expectations were for the different committees. So the Housing Advisory Committee thinking, okay, your main focus would be on the secondary suite side, and the Economic Development Committee main focus would be on the commercial side, and the ADC looking at land use bylaw changes as a whole. And so that's the end of my recommendation.
That's fast.
We're out.
Could I just ask,
Yeah.
if I was the new owner of this land, what they're obviously trying to do is to bring this into compliance.
Yeah.
Okay, let's assume that's done. Now, is that then a sensible platform for them to look at this area over again, now it's in compliance,
Yeah.
and then from there decide if you like, a more futuristic plan for this area, which it, frankly, in my opinion, it desperately needs in view of its lack of washrooms and everything else it really does. So is this the launch pad for the opportunity, if they wish to make further developments now once it's compliant?
I guess I would say it could be, but not necessarily.
It doesn't have to be,
It doesn't have to be, yeah.
Because I would love to see something seriously done, and I would support anything that it would bring it into compliance. Is obviously a good start, I guess.
But there's your amenity zoning.
I don't. Whatever. I just look at that area, and I favour anything that helps move it forward, to be honest. And that's my question. If we do this, this is stage 1, which is then more helpful, enabling them if they wish to further develop the area.
Yeah, I mean, I guess sort of council could take different approaches, because one council could, you could conceivably say, well, we'd like the whole thing redone. We don't want to allow incremental little bits. We'd rather see it, we'd rather see clean slate and go for it. And so we're not going to go forward with this one, because we'd rather see how, would that lead to the result you wanted? Well, maybe, but.
Or is this just a basic step 1 to get things?
I mean, this is basic step 1 in terms of, to be able to grant building permits to the work on the dock, to be able to allow business licenses for the businesses on the dock. This is what we put out as like the step to bring current operations into compliance.
Right.
Yeah.
For instance, if this would be a comprehensive development zone, and you would go out to the owners and say, what do you want to do? And you would not be restricted by the limitations of the 2 separate zones.
Yeah.
Right? Now, however ambitious it is or not, it could be very much like it is with some changes but somehow then you're not restricted by the 2 different zones, but of course you have to go through a rezoning application, which may take time and money and effort. But it would be a way, but then with the amenity zoning, you know, if, I don't know if you can do that, right, because these are two different zones, but if you would have in each of them, it says, well, this is what you really want, but this is the outright use, but come back with something that we like better, then you encourage an applicant to do that. I'm not sure if this is the right site for that, but it's more the idea, right, that somehow you can say, yeah, outright you can do this, fine, here's your approval, but look at this, council is interested in more and is interested in making it a comprehensive development zone, which means that you basically negotiate with the owner what is the most suitable for that area, right?
Yeah.
And
Trying
they
to
may
look at it
totally
more
ignore it,
holistically,
right?
yeah, because I just want, have we had discussions with them on what it is there?
Well, I don't want us to, sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to make sure we stay on track, because I feel like that might be more community economic development committee or APC or something. I feel like for us, really, they're talking about the housing thing, right?
Just the housing? You want
It's-
to restrict this to housing?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what they're wanting
That's
from
what
our
Ken
committee,
was having.
right? Yeah,
Okay,
so I
well,
mean,
that's-
although I am interested in talking about that, maybe we can do that afterwards, but I think that's a bigger picture discussion. So if we just looked, maybe you could go back to the visual, just a little floor plan or something. I get this, like my initial reaction is that we as a committee would be in support of this. It's an existing building, they're existing suites, I'm only guessing they've been previously occupied. And it's in the cove, it's walkable to everything, like this is exactly where we want to see more density, more rental units, and this is a rental unit. So in my mind, it just ticks all the boxes, so we would absolutely be in support of it.
But I think it's a great example, right, that if you look at secondary suites on a neighborhood basis,
Yeah.
on local merit,
Yeah.
how can you possibly say no to that?
Yes.
And you could even say from, what if there would have been 3 instead of 1,000, if for employee housing it would be better to have 3 at 500, then, but if council looks at examples like that, then it kind of, you say, well, yeah, you know, something should be, if it isn't outright, it should go to staff, and there it is.
So maybe that's the feedback we can do, and I don't know how we best record this. Deb, can you
Yeah.
record this as we're going? So, so firstly, that yes, we're in support of this application. It creates, I can't remember, a little preamble, it creates, the type of housing that Bowen Island needs, so we're in support of it. In addition, this is a great example of how, I don't know how to word this, like in a forthcoming report, we'll be saying more, but how we think that, that council could be looking at on neighborhood levels or on a case-by-case basis to consider multiple suites or different,
It says something like number and size.
yeah,
You know,
considering
because
number and
size
size of suites. Either on a neighborhood basis or on a case-by-case basis.
Yes,
That is a
Yeah.
really complicated
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah.
So, but did we say it's going to be quite complicated for full to?
I mean, it's more interesting, we can take more wording of the recommendation.
I think we
But
could,
it's like-
it could be a simpler.
But if it's like,
wording, for sure.
the Housing Advisory Committee supports the rezoning at 375 per unit to
Yeah.
allow an additional secondary suite,
Yeah, period.
it's like
With
period.
the following
point one.
comments, right?
With the following comments.
Yes,
Yeah,
to allow an additional secondary suite. With the following comments, so we just need to clean up the comments.
Do we have minimum square footage for secondary suites?
I don't think it gives a minimum,
There's a minimum, yeah.
except that it has to be a suite, so it has to have.
yes, we say, yeah, it has to have, bathroom, kitchen, living area,
Yeah.
sleeping
yeah,
area.
yeah, screen, that would be useful. Thank you.
so not a,
Okay.
yeah, so, and I think in like building code, you'd end up with a minimum size that would be something to be a suite, but it's probably pretty
Because
small.
I know of at least 2 which are incredibly small, but like
Well, some
incredibly
of them are
tiny.
in the 200, like 250 or so, like, but then Vancouver has all its own regulations.
Yes. Just out of interest.
So, yeah, so I think what we'll do is we'll say, yes, we approve whatever that wording was with the following comments, and then maybe we can just make a few bullet points, and that'll,
And often, what Daniel does is, there's the recommendation, but you summarize the gist of the discussion within the committee. So it may not be necessary to have bullet points within the recommendation itself. if Daniel's capturing it in the feedback
That's
from
true,
the
yeah.
council.
Yeah, so more it's like a bullet point if there's like specific things.
Okay.
So if you're saying, like, so maybe one is like, is saying that it, you know, matches the direction the Housing Advisory Committee,
Yeah.
you know,
So yeah, I'm
is looking to
thinking,
recommend or something like that, or, I
like,
don't know.
this preamble that I had, which
Yeah.
I think the wording works, and you can just copy and paste it probably step or something, but it, you know, that the Housing Advisory Committee, our overarching goal is to encourage the creation of more diverse housing options for the community with emphasis on low and middle income housing. With that in mind, we support this
That's- yeah, that's
rezoning
good.
So that's
application.
the whereas then, right?
Yeah, maybe that's the
Yeah.
good thing. Yeah, okay, sorry, I'm getting used to the language. So the whereas, and then we support. And then, so then should we just speak to you, and are you gonna make notes right now, or I guess
Yep,
it's
I'll
on
watch
video?
the video.
So I'm thinking it's the consideration of multiple suites within one dwelling, because that's something that
Yeah.
we're considering, right, as
Yeah.
in our larger report. And we think that in either particular circumstances or particular neighborhood, this makes a lot of sense. And to Fritz's kind of point again, do you have 1,000 square foot one unit or 2 500 square foot units? What benefit is that and everything? So those considerations, so this is in line, giving us a good example of how this is working well. And then I had a couple more, what were the ones that were ticked off? So that's point one on those things. And then bringing up, in addition, bringing up the sort of, shall we call it the low-hanging fruit, right? The, in addition when, oh no, sorry, that's looking at short-term rentals, forget it, no, that's not what this one's about. So I was looking at the bed and breakfast thing,
Oh,
which this
yeah.
doesn't apply for. Oh, it does number 5 though applies, which is a secondary suite shall not exceed a total floor space of 990 square meters. And I know it's not the particular one we're looking at, but the one that was approved.
Yeah,
So again, this is a great example where, especially in, I'm thinking in an existing building, it's good, like it's different maybe if you're approving a brand new building and a brand new design, but I'm sure there's some existing housing stock on Bowen that doesn't comply with this, and this is a great opportunity to look at an existing grandfathered building, whatever language you want to
Yeah.
use, that doesn't meet these criteria, but is a great housing stock for us to use, so.
Could the point be, is a good example of a flexible response to an existing non-conforming dwelling?
Dwelling.
Yeah,
That's
but
great.
well, yes
I like
and
that.
no, because it also makes it sound like it's unique and it doesn't set a precedent. You know what I mean? I think the general idea is that, like, I think the consideration of multiple suites in one dwelling, I think it has to say of varying sizes or smaller suites, whatever, right? But it has to, because if it just shows like more, it's never good. So if you have consideration of multiple suites of smaller sizes, maybe,
So Steph,
because then
did
it
you
doesn't
capture that?
mean you just are saying everybody can have as many suites as they like. No, there is a limitation maybe in floor space, and you decide how to divide that, and then still it has to go through a conditional approval.
So could we put, just so we're all on the same page, steps right up, here I was at. The second point, consideration of multiple suites in one dwelling, could you put in brackets? For example, 1 times 1,000 square feet versus, yeah, just X, 1X, or, yeah, 1,000 square feet versus 2 times 500 square feet. Does that kind of capture what we're talking
I
about?
think so, yeah.
So it's, I agree, it's not saying you could have 5,000 square foot, that's not what we're talking about. It's saying some flexibility in, you know, whatever those limits are in terms of size
Yeah.
and all that stuff, but dividing them up differently and that's also should be considered on a, do we want to add in there, that's considered on a neighborhood basis or on other factors, or no, that's confusing?
Well, I think if you go through that whole secondary suite neighborhood idea, the moment you move yourself away from the cove into much larger lots,
Yeah,
and you draw how big the 900 or 1,000 square feet is, it's basically nothing. And
yeah,
then if you look for secondary, detached secondary suites that should be suitable for families, there is absolutely no reason why they couldn't be bigger if they provide more use.
okay, so that's a separate point then, so let's
Yes.
leave that one as it is, so consideration of multiple suites in one dwelling. And then I think a good example of a flexible response to an existing non-conforming dwelling. And I think the bracket, in brackets to that is like, a suite that is over the size, the square foot limit or
Right.
something, over the size limitation.
Yeah.
That's the sort of what we're getting at there. And again, these are, so is this helpful, because then this is leading into when we do the report, how we think that
Exactly.
these things should change. And then, I'm guessing it also
Can I
might,
just go back
yes,
to the third point? It's
Yes.
not just a suite that's over the size limitation, it's the 2 suites.
Okay.
That's the, I think, the important point,
okay,
because the size limitations
So I
are
think
dealt with.
okay,
Council's dealt with that.
yeah,
Whereas we're being asked, you know, is it okay to have a second suite?
yeah. I'd like to leave both in if we can, I take your point,
Yeah.
but I'd love to leave both in because, of, again, where it's gonna lead us in the future. So like, as in, hooray, you approved the variance, I know you're not asking us about it, but we're gonna give you a thumbs up anyways. And then the thing that you're actually asking us about is the fact that it's a second suite. So a suite that is over the side limitation and a second.
And multiple suites.
And multiple suites, thank you.
Tertiary suite.
Tertiary suite.
Oh.
Yeah, fancy. Yes.
In our sentence of approval, should we have, after additional secondary, is that
Yes,
also
well, that-
within the following comments? Because I don't know that the rest of the development isn't our issue. Our issue is just the housing part of it.
So sorry, say that again, we should
So
somewhere
the
put.
housing committee supports rezoning applications,
Yeah.
and allow additional secondary what?
Secondary suite.
It's,
Secondary suite.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's just definitely,
Yeah,
she's trying to
yeah.
capture.
Where am I?
So,
Yeah.
it's easier, but it's right there.
Oh,
Secondary suite, agreed, because that's really what
Yeah,
we're
that's
commenting on.
component of it, yeah.
With the following comments.
This
And-
this is a really important precedent.
That's what I think, and it's hitting a lot of things. And then the next one I want is, it's number 6 in the bylaw, is a secondary suite shall not occupy more than 40%. Because I'm guessing these secondary suites are likely like 50-50, I'm just kind of taking,
They're not,
oh, they're not.
so there's a main floor of the house that's the same size, and there's an upper floor.
Oh, so- okay, so that doesn't matter. Okay, so we won't bring that one in then.
That'll come up later.
Yeah, I was going to say, if it, now, just a matter of interest, if it were the case,
Yeah,
I'm not trying to digress, but if it were the case, that we might need to get our thoughts together, would we still, how would we feel if that was the,
well, I mean, that's one of our things that is one of our recommendations that I also think is kind of the no-brainer, is
Me
that
too.
take out the 40%.
Yeah, but I think that's better to leave some of it for later.
Yeah.
because it,
Yeah, I
it
don't wanna
waters
muddy the
down
waters on this.
response to the specific
Yeah, exactly.
referral. Yeah.
So, okay, let's leave that for later, but,
It's good.
so, what do we think? We reread this, so. Comments, so the application is not in the direction. I don't know about the first line, the
that was
application.
really big.
Yeah,
really
sorry,
nice
yeah.
Discussion.
Yeah, you can take that out.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we
sorry,
take
yeah,
that because
the
it's.
overarching goal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so considers, maybe just grammar there, considers
Yeah, I like it.
multiple
Consideration.
suites.
So the application, or
Well, I mean, do we want to be,
demonstrates,
yeah, maybe demonstrates.
say the application demonstrates
Yeah,
consideration.
application demonstrates, how multiple suites in one dwelling,
Have
can work
merit
well,
or
or
something?
something like that.
Functionality,
Yeah.
effectiveness.
The application is a good example of multiple suites in one dwelling in a neighborhood, you know, in a good location near the cove or something like that. Is that a factor? Because to me, it
Yeah.
is a factor, like, again, we could
It
discuss other
functions,
things,
yeah.
but to me, the fact that it's in the cove, it's walkable to things, and it's creating, this one particularly is a fairly small unit, which hopefully would have a reasonable rent rate. It's a great example of something that we want to encourage. It's a good example of multiple suites in one dwelling, yeah, in the cove, sure.
Sure. Yeah.
For example,
I see that example is quite, because it, like, the total between the two is gonna be more than, like, the larger one is larger than 1,000 square feet. So this isn't saying, well, look, within 90 square meters, you can do more things,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they're doing with more than 90 square meters.
Yeah, okay, so maybe we leave that, the brackets, for example, and we can bring that up in a separate thing, because it's not, I'm trying to figure out, because it's all oversized, it's kind of not
Yeah.
quite the nut that we're trying to get at with that. So I'm wondering if we take out that in brackets there, the for example 1 versus 2.
Yeah, you can take it out.
Because I think that's not quite relevant to this, it's relevant to other stuff. So then, and so the application is a good example of multiple suites in one dwelling. I think I just, instead of in the cove, something more like, you know,
Inappropriate
in
location.
an appropriate
Yeah,
location.
yeah.
Yeah,
You're saying it's not like-
for a smaller,
Yeah.
in an appropriate location.
It's not a tiny lot on Woods Road that is trying to fit lots of
Yeah.
suites in, but it's like,
Appropriate location.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So then the next one, good example of a flexible response to existing non-conforming dwelling. I really like that. A suite that is over the size limitation and multiple space. I can just take out the tertiary. I know it's a fun word, but
but
let's
yeah,
just take
no,
it out.
it's confusing,
It'll
yeah,
hurt,
yeah.
That's good enough.
We need at least one really good word. in
I
there.
know, it's great, we can use it somewhere else. Creates the type of housing that Bowen Island needs. I think that's, I don't know if that needs to be said, but I think it's good.
Just
Um,
it creates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So maybe, or like if approved, this creates the
Oh.
type of, something like that, if approved?
Well,
Yeah, if approved, this creates the type of housing units that Bowen Island needs. Housing units.
Lose the fourth point.
And then, yeah, the fourth point will just, that'll come up in a set in the report or at a future time.
yeah, that
So
goes
just
out.
delete that.
Yeah.
And then great example of how in the fourth.
We've already used the word example, but.
Yeah, that's okay.
Do you need that?
I can leave that out and say just in the comments that like the housing, you know, it's similar to work that the committee has been
Yeah.
doing and looking to bring
Yeah,
up. And
and
it's
then-
just not part of the recommendation, but
Yeah.
it's just like, I could just say,
More to come.
that's what we're gonna do, yeah.
More to
It's a
come.
preview, more to come. Okay,
Yeah,
so we'll just, that's our bit up top, that's
Yeah.
separate for Daniel to consider. So if everybody, do we
Yeah.
need to make a resolution then?
Okay, so.
Is that what happens?
Yeah.
We need to make a resolution, and this is our, as a committee, this is our recommendation. So I'll read it out. Whereas the overarching goal of the Housing Advisory Committee is to encourage the creation of more diverse housing options for the community, with emphasis on low and middle income households. That the Housing Advisory Committee supports the rezoning application, blah, 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 to allow an additional secondary suite with the following comments. The application is a good example of multiple suites in one dwelling in an appropriate location. The application is a good example of a flexible response to an existing non-conforming dwelling, a suite that's over the size limitation and multiple suites. If approved, this creates the type of housing units that Bowen Island needs. I'm quite happy with that.
I
Yeah.
think we need to change the supports. We need to get response to council in here. So
Okay.
therefore be resolved that the Housing Advisory Committee recommends that council support.
Okay.
Is that okay?
yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Recommends that council support.
I love this stuff, this is so great.
Yeah, okay, so is everybody good with that?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so do we move? I'll move, second by Maureen, and we're all in favor, unanimous. Okay. Done.
Cool.
Okay, so that was 7.2.
That's good.
Do we want to go, and I know we've got the maps, I'm just conscious of time, and I know Michael has to get going soon. Maybe what we can do, the housing maps, can we defer that, or at least put it to the
Yep.
bottom of the list, and if we
Yep.
get to it, we get to it, but I might defer it. Because I'd like to get to the 7.1, the council
Yep.
referral on short-term rental policy, because I think that's gonna get to the crux of what other issues we've been talking about. So let's go to that one.
Sorry,
Okay.
short-term rental?
Yeah, so 7.1, council refers short-term rental policy. Is there any?
So I have the same presentation again that Emma gave to council on Monday. Just,
Oh, okay, okay.
I think I put it, the 19.
This one here?
No, the one that starts 19,
Oh,
that one, yeah.
okay. Great. You got your clicker?
I got it. Okay, so short-term rental policy. So as you know, we started work on this in February and put together a work plan. So we did a number of stages. So reviewed the existing conditions. We did engagement with stakeholders and are bringing, and what we did on Monday night was to bring a draft policy to council that got sent out for referral. So just some of the overview. So as part of the review, what we had found was that, and this was really key when we come to the seasonal rental piece, is that Bowen has a high seasonal population. So I think it was like 25% of the dwellings on Bowen are not occupied by full-time residents, but occupied part of the year. We found, so work, Host Compliance is a company, they did a review, they found many short-term rental listings on Bowen.
How many?
120.
It was only
Yeah,
120.
it was 123 listings and I think 103 unique listings. So some places were multiple
Double.
listings.
Yeah,
No,
and
Steph,
that
I
was
just
in-
lost my presentation.
And that was in January.
That was in January, so there's some questions about data quality of that.
It's likely to be more in the summer, right?
I would think
No,
some
not sure.
intuitively, but yeah, because it's like, do people rent them out and they stay in them in the summer?
Yeah.
Or do they
Yeah.
take the list, you know, and, or if people are listing them year round, they probably still list them in January. They're just not as
Almost
full.
certain it will be that it's more in the summer.
There may be more rentals in the summer,
Yeah.
but there may be listings in January and people book for the summer.
Maybe.
So it's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's hard to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Without having, yeah, you could argue either way, so it's like.
And do we have, not to put you on the spot,
Yeah.
do we know business license numbers for actual PNDs that have been, and if you don't have the answer
Yes.
right now, I'm just curious how that compares to
Yeah.
who's actually registered their, legitimate
Yeah.
PND with a business
Let me
license?
check. I know, somebody had asked me, and so I sent it. 23 licensed bed and breakfasts. And then I go, some of which may be included in those online listings. So that's the other thing is
Yeah.
that, right, Airbnb has listings, some of which you can list on Airbnb something that would comply with our bed and breakfast regulations,
Exactly,
and some
yeah.
of which would not.
Yeah.
So same with, like, one of the things that it found was, I think it was 84% of the listings were entire home, but the way Airbnb lists entire homes, if you have an accessory,
See what works.
accessory building that has a bedroom and a bathroom, that can be a bed and breakfast unit, but Airbnb would count that as an entire home, because they just mean entire building and not entire dwelling, so it's sort of funny. So anyways, part of it, we looked at 22 comparable municipalities, looked at some of their business licensing schemes and how they address it through zoning. And I'll note too, because this came up at council as well, so the 22 we reviewed, we focused on, okay, what's comparable, but also like, what are communities that have addressed this? So, other communities are kind of like Bowen, where we don't allow it, and then how much actually happens on the ground is sort of a matter of thing. But if you look at the, if you look at the zoning, it would say, okay, it's not allowed. But there's nothing,
Yeah.
there's no sort of work done to tease it out. So there's some of the engagement with stakeholder groups and different communications tools, engagement initiatives, so on and so forth. I'll skip through this. All right, so, and kind of through the engagement, what came up were almost two separate avenues. So one is in terms of like, not even neighborhood impact, but like neighbor impact. So a lot of concerns from people about, well, I don't like them next week because they're noisy, the parking issues, all that sort of like nuisance issues. And then the other concerns that would come up would be impact on rental issues. So there's sort of these two streams and two different approaches of how you go about doing it. But so like I said, we've got high support for things like business licensing, like requiring that if you list it, you have a local contact so somebody can come on site and shut down the parties and whatever else. High support for moderate regulations. We felt like, okay, there can't be too much, but can't be as much. And high support for existing, like the bed and breakfast regulations that are existing. High support for most concerns for entire home short-term rentals, so the entire dwelling. So instead of almost like dwelling, it's not the Airbnb entire house, but using an entire dwelling for it. And the secondary suite short-term rental. So let's go on where we're going next. So in terms of staff coming up with a policy to establish a regulatory approach for short-term rentals to help facilitate fair short-term rental use, mitigate negative impacts for the community. Okay, let's see what's going on here. And so like we said, the one consideration about neighborhood impact, so looking at operator accountability, and then the separate concern being the long-term housing impacts. So requiring business licensing, having requirements on the business licensing that is a good neighbor agreement and however exactly that works.
Please.
Is it open?
Thank you.
Yes. Just lower. And then the second piece that what we were proposing is, we'll go through these, is the idea of seasonal rentals. So that's the piece that came up a lot through the engagement of people doing it, is they say, well, I live in it part-time, it's not going to be long-term rental housing. But if you say I can't rent it out to people, it's gonna sit empty because, you know, we come here on the weekends, we come here long weekends, we come here some nights and not others, or some months and not others. So one of the things we were proposing is, so one is within the bed and breakfast. So right now, bed and breakfast says you can't have kitchen facilities. And what we constantly end up with is fights with people about what's a kitchen facility. So in our bylaw, kitchen facility is anywhere where you can cook or prepare food. So it could be a counter and a sink is a kitchen facility, microwave is a kitchen, you know, is a kitchen, fridge is a kitchen. If you asked people on the island and said, what can you do in a bed and breakfast, they would say you can't have an oven. And that would be, you know, so we end up with this fight always. People say, well, no, I took out the oven, it's no longer a kitchen. We're like, well, you still got a sink, you still got a fridge, you still got blah, blah, blah. And it's this sort of endless fight.
Yeah.
So what we're instead proposing is we have this definition already within our land use bylaw for, I think for inns and guest houses or something, but it's a limited kitchen facility. So it would outline and say, okay, this is what you're allowed to do. It's really clear. You can't be a dwelling, you can't have a fridge, so it's separate from a suite. But the other one we're proposing is, and we're open for suggestions on names, but a category that would be seasonal rentals that says, okay, you can, if you have a dwelling unit, it can be rented for a period, it can be rented on a short-term basis for up to 120 days within the year. It would have maximum capacity, but it would say, okay, this is in recognition, I think, of Bowen's higher seasonal population to say, homes that are sometimes used can be then used sometimes as a short-term rental on a nightly basis. And so the 120 days we took for a couple different communities that did it, and thinking that, okay, either that's 4 months straight, that is in fact, you know, every weekend of the year would fit within 120 days.
Right. And this is aimed at addressing the entire building, right? So houses
Yeah.
that are the entire
Yeah.
house being done, it's proposed that they have a 120-day limit.
Yeah, so essentially what we would do is we would say, okay, one avenue for people is the bed and breakfast route, which is currently there and would continue to be there, which is you live, you are the operator is a resident of the dwelling and has bedrooms or, you know, some sort of, you know, limited, or essentially what we call guest bedrooms, but they can be, you know, an accessory building that has a bedroom and a living area and has limited kitchen facilities, right? Can be used as a bed and breakfast, can be used as a bed and breakfast.
So year round, that's no
Year
problem.
round, you do it all the time if you live in the dwelling and you do it. Your second avenue is, well, I'm there sometimes and I want it, you know, it's gonna sit empty, why can't I do some sort of tourist accommodation overnight rental? And would say, okay, you can do that for this limited period of time. So some communities, what their approach with that sort of conundrum is, they allow it if it's like a principal residence. So like Victoria says, okay, you live there and that's where your homeowner grant is and, you know, your address and that's where you live. When you're not there, you can have somebody stay there. And what we found on Bowen was, well, we've got a higher number of people who, it's not their principal residence, or principal residence maybe it's West Van or maybe it's somewhere, but they're on Bowen enough of the time that they say, well, I'm not gonna have a long-term tenant in it because it's my weekend place, it's my summer place, whatever it may be. So it's fine with that. And I think that's probably the biggest piece that, when we came to council on Monday, biggest topic of conversation, and I think a biggest piece for us in terms of explaining the policy as well, because, you know, sort of comments from people like, well, if you say I can only rent it out for 4 months, it's gonna be empty for 8 months. Why do you want it empty for 8 months? And I think our thing is, no, the thinking was, well, it's something that you're using for 6 months and it's empty for 6 months, so you can use it for some of that time where it would be empty. But the goal being that if it's something that somebody wants to rent out year round on a nightly basis, that is then not what the intent of this is. That the intent is not to allow the every night rental, the short-term rental, that's a commercial use. And if you want to pursue that, then you should be looking for temporary use permit, or it's just not appropriate in a residential area. Maybe outlining somehow better, like people's options. These are the different avenues. But in terms of the responses we got from people, and like planning practices, like renting it out every night on a nightly basis is a commercial use. It's not what the residential zones are intended for, and should be through a rezoning or a temporary use permit, or just should not be allowed in residential zones.
I have a question that's
Sure.
coming up for me, which
Yeah.
is, I feel like we've gotten swayed away from asking ourselves, how can we increase the number of available long-term rentals on the island? Because it's such a strong pull from the people who want to make more money here on the island, who already live here. We're going, okay, this is huge. I can make $120 a night or something like that, and I can make thousands. And when you start asking people, that becomes a very strong pull. But I think we need to take a step back and say, how is short-term rentals impacting on the viability of having rentals, more rentals in this community available? And I don't feel that we have those statistics at all. We talk about it a little bit, we have some sort of supposition, we think. Other communities must have done a lot of research on this.
Tofino did research on it, and their conclusion was that the regulation of short-term rentals in their community essentially had little or no impact on increasing the availability of long-term rentals. Just people, if they were prevented from short-term rentals,
They didn't do anything.
they left it empty.
Is that, I don't think one community is enough. Because it's
So there were
happening all over
22
the
of
world.
them looked at for this purpose.
There were.
And I think
And
it's
is
kind
that
of like,
consistent?
I'm gonna say, like, almost the, you know, how you would see it input is so, it's like, it's not firsthand, it's not like, well, we would put this in and suddenly there would be 20 more rental units available. Because people say, well, you know, I bought it, then I'd have to sell it, maybe the new person, or maybe, you know, gradually it's like housing prices would be affected. It's very sort of marginal. Yeah, how it directly impacts. It's not like a one-to-one relationship,
it's
but
not.
it's like, it's meant, so, and there are, like, there just came out, I think a couple of weeks ago, a big study about Airbnb and impact on housing markets that was like major market. And so it does have impact, but it's hard to quantify.
It's
and
very
say,
hard.
Right, if we have, you know, however many, not many rental units, how many would we have if people, you know, if there were no Airbnbs, how many would there be? There'd probably be
Exactly.
more, but I couldn't tell you there'd be 2 more or there'd be 50 more.
And it takes a long time. Like at
Yeah.
first people just think, well, I'll just not do anything for now and then maybe I'll start to quietly do it under the table. And it might take 10 years before people go, okay, I'm going to rent this out long term.
There have been some people who've made that choice, not so much in response to this, because this is still in progress, but in response to the provincial government taking action and requiring certain taxes came in last October. And there have been some units that have gone back into long-term in response to that. But what's coming up later in this presentation, if I'm remembering correctly, is that secondary suites are identified as not appropriate for short-term rental,
Right.
you know, whether they're attached or detached, and sort of there would be greater clarity among the different types of rentals as a result of
What I
this.
kind of don't like about the oven rule is that if you say, let's still talk about a new house, right? And you say it should be the secondary suite rental ready, right? That doesn't mean the person needs to rent it out long term. So they could decide to rent it out either as a B&B, right, as a Airbnb. But so basically, what you say, if you let people build spaces that are usable for long term, and they can use it for short term because they're not going to rent it out long term anyway, right? Then you provide an opportunity. And I think that if I go back and think about how all these municipalities, for instance in the past, made sure that nobody could have a basement that you could possibly live in. That's what Vancouver has done for 40 or for 50 years, right? And now all these houses are just, half of them have to come down because they can't get their maximum use. So I would say no, you have to build spaces that are suitable for secondary suites, and people can rent them out part-time if they want to. Because then in a way, at a certain point, people get tired of short-term rental, or if they would rather have a stable tenant, they can do that. But otherwise, because you take the oven out, somehow you're assuming that now that suite is not suitable for long-term. First of all, it's kind of ridiculous because somebody will put it in the oven anyway, but...
Basically, I agree with you around the oven thing, for sure. But I just think we already have a population that has a lot of money. It's very wealthy. And yet we're encouraging putting in something that's going to allow them to have even more money. Whereas I'm thinking about the lower end of our population. population in terms of economy, how can we make it easier for them to be able to continue to live here?
But
That's
yeah,
what's
but-
coming up for me again and again.
Well, true, but like, if you use the capital that people have and they're going to build something, you're going to use that too. So I think
Yeah.
these are two kind
I'm
of
not
separate.
arguing with her, I just would say more limitations. For me, I would go with more limitations on Airbnbs, short-term rentals.
Of what sort?
Well, there was I think I mentioned this to you, there was a community around in Scotland that said, okay, we're going to start to do a lottery, and there will be no more than, I can't remember what it was. It would, yeah, it was a cap. You say, we set this date, and there's a cap of, say, we'll do 50 will be allowed here ongoing. That's it. And then, if you get your short-term rental, fine, you're in. If you're not, you say, okay, how do I consider making money? And people would start to look then at long-term rentals. I like that. I worry about making it yet another way for our island that's already wealthy to make more money.
I'm wary on the short-term rentals being too much of a specific legislation, because I think what drives it more for what people will do and choose to use, have as a type of tenant inside the property, is by what's the economy doing. If the economy slows down and there's less tourism visits to the island, they will want to go for a longer term tenant.
True.
Because it's security of someone being in there. And that's going to drive the use of the property, not writing some legislation that says remove an item. You can only use this for short-term rental now.
I don't think the oven is intended as a.
But I'm saying you can't legislate it. Forget the detail. You can't legislate it. People will be driven by help. I need to pay my mortgage. I need someone in there. Help! I can't be in the property all year as much as I want to because I don't have the spare money. Therefore, I'll rent it out. Currently, people don't rent the house out because they bought a $2 million house as a holiday home on Bowen. They don't want someone living in there.
And they don't need extra money.
Yeah, at present, but the economy turns south and the property value in Vancouver goes down. They're then totally caught. They need the income, and that's going to drive. That's going to be Bowen's recent 20-year history of our housing policy for rental people and working people on the island. And that's what we need to address.
So if I can jump in with a couple of thoughts. One is I'm in total agreement with Frits. I actually think you should remove any restriction on kitchen facilities. Like, I just don't even think that should be a consideration. Who cares? Like, and to the point of, one, people might just do whatever the heck they want anyways. But two, it really puts a strain. Like, if you say to somebody, so I'm just thinking, for example, I have one friend, so this is just a direct thing that I know.
Yeah.
They have a home, they built a secondary suite in it. They use that for visitors. It's kind of that classic
Yeah.
example. They make use of it part of the year, and then they make use of it part of the year for short-term rentals for extra income, right? And it helps them pay their bills. And so they would be, I don't know if they'd be under the 120-day cap or if it's operated as a B&B, doesn't matter, whichever way. If for some reason you said, oh, you can no longer use that, you have to take the kitchen out, right? Then that means they either take it off the market and just use it for personal use, or because they're not going to rent it long term, that doesn't suit their use of the home, or they rip out the kitchen, right, and then continue to use it as they do, and then circumstances change and they do want to rent it out long term, or they sell the home and somebody buys it, and then somebody has to put the kitchen back in. Like, it just to me seems like it doesn't, who cares? It doesn't matter if there's a kitchen or not. And I think I get the idea in principle of the B&B, of no kitchens, you come out and use the restaurants or whatever it is. I'm thinking that's where it came from in the beginning. But in my opinion, it leaves it, the space and what the facilities are in the space, you want to leave it so that it's as flexible and ready to be rented long-term as possible. And I feel like if you take those things out, it's a barrier to then it being rented long-term in future for either future owners or change of life and circumstance. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we discussed was secondary suites, the idea being that we're saying, okay, you can rent a dwelling for a period of time and overnight. Does that apply to a suite, which is a dwelling as well? We say a secondary suite, or we have secondary suite is a dwelling as well. So why, the house but not the suite? And sort of, when is it okay and when is it not okay? We went to council in the July 29th with the feedback to date. The strongest feedback we got from council in those minutes is not be allowed in secondary suites.
Say it again?
Was that short-term rentals not be, or secondary suites not be permitted as short-term rentals. So the
Yeah.
intent behind the secondary suite bylaw, the detached secondary suite bylaw, is that those are for long-term rental. And then it does get kind of a bit into a game in terms of what's a secondary suite versus what's a guest bedroom. I mean, I think some of the rationale behind when the bed and breakfast started was, well, you're allowed to have bed and breakfast rooms in accessory buildings, but how do you know that they're, you know, if you can build 5 guest cabins for your bed and breakfast, well, they all have kitchens, they all kind of look like, they're all kind of dwellings, and then, you know, they're bed and breakfast, but suddenly they have 5 detached secondary suites on their property, and then, yeah, you know, as uses change, so it's definitely a challenge. We got feedback from, people who have secondary suites within their homes, and they're available short-term rentals. And under this approach would be, okay, your choice is to turn it into a bed and, like if you're living in the dwelling, you can turn it into a bed and breakfast unit, which would mean taking out the kitchen, and that's your option. And then if somebody wanted to convert it back to a secondary suite, they would again be converting it back into a secondary suite. Without sort of that distinction, because to do that, then it's like the person would have to, you know, we're requiring then the person to be living in the house, renting out. Without that distinction, saying, well, any dwelling, then it's like in theory they could be renting both. Like they would both be seasonal rentals, maybe the secondary suite and the house are seasonal. You know, nobody has to live in the building. They can have 2 seasonal rental units within. So it's sort of that's the most almost puzzling bit of how exactly to do it and how is it going to be enforced.
Yeah, I can see the challenges, but
Yeah.
that would be my feedback. I think, and I think I totally get where council is coming from. Like, no, if you have a secondary suite, that's meant for long-term rentals.
Yeah.
But I think the reality on the ground is that people have secondary suites, whether they've bought them or built them for future or whatever, and making them rip out a kitchen so they can continue to earn a bit of extra income. I don't know.
I think what will happen too, if you have the 2-tier zoning, right, and you encourage people to build rental-ready suites, right, and you give them more square footage for that reason, a lot of people will do that. But they will not do that if you say you're forced to rent these things out. So the whole idea is that you provide opportunity and you expect that somehow, from day one or later, sometime, that these spaces are used for secure rental, for rental, I should say, right? Now, if you leave that decision with your homeowner, they think, oh, that's a great opportunity, and I will use that as it suits me. But the moment you start to regulate it, I think a lot of people will not even go for the bonus of extra square footage. They say, well, I just want to live in my little home and feel that's my home, and I don't want to have a tenant in there that I can have difficulty getting rid of, or something like that, right? And that's the fear. So it's all based, in my mind, you have to provide opportunity, you have to facilitate. And I think like the word legislature, I always think that's a scary word, because that's what they do the whole freaking day, is tell people what they cannot do. You know, and it's just not human. Like humans want to be free, and I think the best thing is to have the bonus floor space for rental-ready suites, because suites can be used for long-term, and they can be used for short-term. It doesn't matter, but they're there. And if you let that happen, even the same with the city of Vancouver is doing now. They said everybody got a duplex. It's going to happen. You know, it will happen because it's just logical. You know, so it is more like you can regulate something to death. That's what I honestly believe.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll address that in our bigger report. I don't know that we can address the whole bonus density and everything in here, but I agree. More to that point, the other one I had written down was, how do we create, and I don't know how it's addressed, how do we create incentive for people to rent these out long term?
Yes.
So rather than saying, you cannot rent out a secondary suite short term, and then people start renting out kitchens or whatever. So my first point being, I'd rather see it regulated in terms of like a number of days and all that stuff, and I know that's onerous for enforcement, but that's what I would prefer to see, because I think that actually suits those needs of different people, and the suite's still there, right? It creates that suite and that capacity, even if today it's not being used that way. 2 years down the road, when somebody sells that house, then it is created, and it's already there, right? And it's ready to go. So that's kind of my feedback, but how can we create incentives for people? And I mean, I know we can't use business licensing as a punitive tax, like that's a revenue neutral thing, are there other ways that we can, as a municipality, penalize in some way people for short-term rentals and or
Yes.
incentivize long-term rentals in the same space?
Yes.
Right, whether it has a kitchen or not, do you know what I mean?
I think the municipality's job is to offer the incentive to create the space, to use short or long term, and then we're relying on the market. Too many people, there'll be too many short-term rentals, the price of the short-term rental will drop to such a point that, oh, I don't like doing the laundry 3 times a week. I'd much prefer to have a long-term tenant who does the laundry and keeps the place clean for me. And at present, we're just in Airbnb's just come in, it's the fancy thing to get a huge double income, so it's very attractive. But when the volume of short-term suites gets so larger, the price will drop, and that will change the economic decision that the property owner will make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
the time to hassle,
and that's the unfortunate
risk
part, that's the
can
painful
go along,
part.
right?
But we can't legislate them to tell them you must put your property this way. They're
I
going to just
think we
close.
can do both. I think because we're a tourist destination, waiting for the economy to impact like that here, we could wait a long time. I hear what you're saying with that, but I think you can do both.
One of the things that I think is really encouraging is the rent smart sessions that we're doing. The fact that we have 15 landlords or potential landlords signed up and a wait
27
list.
with the wait list, yeah.
With
That's
the
phenomenal.
27. So, I mean, even if a quarter of those people were to move towards long-term rental, that's a chunk
It's
of
huge.
space for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So the education piece, I mean, people have responded with interest to the potential to learn more about what it would mean to be a landlord and how to manage that. So that's one thing that the municipality with Birch has done. And I don't know that the allowing additional floor space, that makes sense, but that's for new builds. And we're probably trying to think about incentivizing people who have existing buildings.
Well, the obvious incentive then to hit the homeowner is by an incremental tax, short-term rental.
Well, we're
So
later in this, we get to that, is the municipal
Yeah.
And regional district tax. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So this is a tool that municipalities and regional districts have, which is called the MRDT tax, and it's a provincially led tax, but essentially municipalities can put together a budget and request for it, where up to 3% of the fee for an overnight accommodation is taxed, and then municipalities, in essence, get the money that used to originally just be towards tourism, and now it can be tourism or affordable housing funds, essentially. So what we've always said through this is like, okay, the first step almost is think about what we're allowing, and then it's, once we know, okay, what we're allowing and what's actually legalized, is to then look at this tax mechanism where it's a 3% tax that would go on that we could then use. We'd have to designate, I think, in advance. You have to sort of budget it and say, okay, we're gonna, whatever it may be, but maybe logical is like 50% of it goes towards tourism incentives and 50% goes to an affordable housing fund. And then the municipality actually has a revenue stream.
how much money is pulling?
I mean, it's hard to say. So we've got numbers.
They get 30,000 a year, so that's going to be what, is that 3 million, and then 3% of 3 million, you're going to get 90,000 a year, and 45,000 a year going then, if half of it is to affordable housing, is that enough?
No, but it's
No.
something.
Please, I've advocated this being considered from day one.
So is that the step maximum?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 No, can't we make it 15% to
Yeah.
really gouge people? No, it's
So
If
what's
it
I
important?
mean, I
could,
feel like
we
this
make
is
it
kind of a
30%.
Yeah. Well, I think council's response was yes, of course.
Yeah.
But the 3% is not a tax on the homeowner.
No,
It's
it's
a tax on the person who's
Yeah.
renting, so that's important. And I haven't heard any objection from any B&B or owner around this.
Because I mean, I
have a property tax that's higher for a short-term rental. I mean, is the municipality allowed to do
No.
that?
So property tax is based on your assessed value. So in theory, then it's like if people are actually getting building permits to do work to put in suites. BC assessment gets that, so your assessed value would go up a little bit
Yeah.
based on the work, and then you'd pay a little bit more
And
taxes.
I know it doesn't exist here, but sorry, I'm just thinking outside the box, same lines. A lot of municipalities tax residential properties differently from commercial properties.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a mechanism
Yeah,
to tax certain, and I don't know if it's zones or dwelling
it's like,
types.
it's BC assessment like categories.
Okay, and do they decide what that category is, or does the municipality decide what category
They
it is?
categorize them, and
Okay.
I mean, it's probably for the most part based on zoning, unless you've got weird, like existing non-conforming stuff that's going
Okay.
on where someone's operating a store in what's now residential.
Yeah.
And on Bowen, correct me if I'm wrong, Maureen, but I believe we tax the same rates, like a lot of places
Yeah,
that
they do,
tax
they're the
commercial
same.
way more.
Yeah. But I think I get what you're saying, and it's like, if there was a mechanism, and I don't know how it works, does it happen like at the beginning of the year, you register, I'm gonna be short-term rentals this year, and you go into a pool that's like, your address is, I don't know if you can do it, but the idea being, again, it's how can we, it's a little harsh of a term, penalize or, you know, make a disadvantage to renting short-term, so there's a trade-off, if you wanna make the more money, it's gonna cost you or it's gonna be a hassle, and then incentivize the long-term rental. Right.
There was a recommendation at UBCM, the Union of BC Municipalities Conference, to enable split rate assessments, and it was supported. And in part it's coming from communities that are facing similar challenges because of short-term rentals and some other issues. Because it was supported, it will go forward to the provincial government for consideration. So the politicians said yes at a local
Right.
level, but there still has to be work done, interest expressed at the
Well,
provincial
I mean,
level.
if we can make that a comment, again, knowing that it's not gonna just happen, but if we can make that a comment, that if and when the opportunity presents, that there is a mechanism available to the municipality to somehow charge higher property taxes or whatever that looks like to people who want to rent short term, that we would highly recommend it, and that would be a way to incentivize renting out. And I don't know what those numbers look like, but if you had to pay an extra, I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, $2,000 a year to enable your property to be a short-term rental, you have to balance that income versus what would I get in a long-term rental, and then all of a sudden becomes, so the people who aren't gonna do it ever and really need the income on short-term rental, they'll just do it anyways, right? Or they might stop doing it, and then other people might actually go, oh, it's actually really worth it for us to rent this out
This
for long-term.
cannot go through the BC assessment or something like that. It's just impossible, right?
Right.
But if that would be some kind of a separate
If there
Bowen
is
tax,
some kind of mechanism that
Yeah,
becomes
something that's
available,
Bowen
and we
based.
acknowledge it doesn't exist right now, but if there was some
it's
way,
your license.
And the money goes to housing, affordable housing.
Well, yeah, so I mean, Frits had mentioned business licenses, and so I mean, we would
Yeah.
look at doing, like, you would pay more for a seasonal rental business license than you would for a bed and breakfast, but I mean, our bed and breakfast license, I think, is $100,
yeah,
right? And a commercial business is 125,
25 or 50.
right? So what would a seasonal rental be to say, this is gonna cover all the costs of, you know, we talk about in this enforcement, online
Yeah.
monitoring and random checks and stuff, and we would incorporate all of that, and you'd probably end up with a fee that's like, you know, that 250 or 300, was that you're paying twice the business license fee of any other business on
Yeah.
Bowen,
Yeah.
but it's still, you know,
It's a
like,
small-
like we said, it's 250, it's double what a commercial is, but it's $150 more.
And
It's
we
one
can't
thing.
arbitrarily make it
Yeah.
higher. Like, for example, I'm pretty sure Vancouver, didn't they have some outrageous business license fee for cannabis dispensers or
Yeah.
something, which is, I don't know how they got away with that. I mean, I don't know, whatever, it was enforcement or something, I don't know, it was very, it was like,
Because it is the city of Vancouver.
oh, because they can just do whatever they want? Okay, so, it would be interesting to see like what that number could pitch. But anyways, that would be a recommendation to,
Or, I mean, maybe we end up with like a tiered one based on nights, because part of it is people go,
Right.
well, you know, I'm going away for 2 weeks in the summer, and I wanna, you know, put it
Yeah.
on, right? So what's
Exactly, yeah.
what's something, you know, what are requirements for that versus somebody says, I want the full 120 nights, maybe it's a 2-tier, and it's like if you're up to 30 nights, you do something, and if you're more than that, you're doing something else. And-
yeah, and I know it gets
Something,
complicated,
yeah.
and I mean, and I'm also of the keep it simple, like let's not
Yeah.
make it too crazy, but then it's like, how else do you address all of these
Yeah.
different needs? And I was glad to hear, because I know that there is, I've heard some feedback from people about these, I'm sure there are operating full-time, full year, full dwelling that are essentially commercial, and I appreciate and agree with the strategy of using either rezoning or temporary use permit, because I think that, you know, they are commercial operations and they're in residential settings, so I'm in agreement with that. I don't know if we need to make a comment on that. So, and then business licensing for sure, if you can make for short-term rentals, if that can be a higher rate and justifiably so with enforcement and like you say, the cost of the compliance, you know, host compliance and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think there's maybe one item you can add to it, because, you know, Maureen was saying from existing houses, right? But for renovations, for additions, for building new, through staff's review of the application, and giving a comparison with the city of Vancouver, they make sure that if you get secondary suites are bonus square footage, you know, in Vancouver, right? Like the detached, the laneway houses.
Yeah.
So they want to make sure that the laneway house it's as likely as possible that that laneway house is used for rental and not for a home office or for your own guests or for you in the backyard for your sound studio, right? So what they do is they check, one of the criteria is that if somebody is renting in it, that the person has the least impact on you. So the unit is not supposed to back into the house, right? Because then maybe it's okay for your family, but you don't want somebody else to stay in your house. So there's a whole bunch of criteria that they use to make sure that, for instance, the windows have to face the lane and not the principal building. Now, that's one example, right? But so the idea is that when these things are built, or when they are added to existing houses, or when a house is converted, then they are designed that as an owner, yes, you can use the space, but if you would rent it out, that same space doesn't order you, right?
Say that last bit again.
Well, so that if the same space is not, if you rent it out, it doesn't have negative impact on you. For example, if you build a rental-ready suite, it will have good sound ratings, but it also means that your privacy is protected from your own suite, so to speak, if you use it or not, right? And that's the thought pattern.
So it encourages you to rent it out.
Yes, and if you rent it out, then it's already, you think, you can rent it out, and, you know, for whatever reason.
Design solution.
So I also want to make sure that we don't forget, and I don't know, are any of our recommendations relevant in this discussion, like the operating a B&B and having a secondary suite clause in the secondary suite bylaw? Like, is that something we want to bring into this discussion?
I think so. I think that's
Yeah.
where you'd want to say, like, if you know, it's like support or whatever your comments are, but one of the comments is that, you know, as part of it, it should change the.
So should we be developing a
Yeah.
recommendation?
I've got one.
Oh, okay. If we can
I'll
put it up
fight
on the
for the
screen when you're
screen.
in. Yeah, switch screens.
I just wanted to,
Yeah.
just one more, so in terms of seasonal rental and within a secondary suite, because I mean, one of the things we thought about is, okay, saying, you know, so assuming that the committee's okay with seasonal rental and saying, well, actually, no, maybe it's appropriate that that happens in a secondary suite as well. One of the things we could do is say, okay, we can have a seasonal rental in a dwelling, but maybe you only get, we limit it, so you get one per your lot. So it's like if you have a
Yes.
house with a secondary suite, we're saying, okay, you can have a seasonal rental,
Yeah,
but you only get
it's-
one.
Yeah.
So like one of the units on your lot is not gonna be used for seasonal rental, it has to be.
This is a minefield.
Yeah.
You're just creating problems. I mean, what happens on a 10-acre lot if someone wants to do part farming, so they want seasonal workers in just from May to September when they're working, and it exceeds the 120 days.
Well, I
Well,
think,
no,
I mean,
but if
I mean,
you're
that's
renting
totally
out,
a
that's
tenant.
long-term.
That's a long-term tenant.
If you're renting out to somebody over
Okay.
30 days, that's long-term. So if you have somebody coming for 3 or 4 months, that's no problem,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about the short stays, the 1-2 nights, the 1-week stays. Like, that's what this is regulating. Anything over 30 days doesn't apply.
But maybe.
I think you say that so along the exact same lines, you said that the 120 days is per property.
Okay.
That would be one easy way of putting it. If
Yeah.
you want to do 60 days here and 60 days, who cares? But that would be one easy way. So then you don't have to identify, like people don't have to choose or whatever. You just
Yeah.
make it a blanket, 120 days per property.
But this formula, again, is kind of, the assumption is that this works in every neighborhood, it's the same, right? But I think that maybe there should be consideration to review this on a neighborhood basis
Can
or
you
on
get it
a.
up on the screen? Because I just.
Oh, you let me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, are you not?
Oh, no, it's okay, I was just a presentation.
Oh, okay.
So Fritz, we did look at neighborhood considerations. And I don't want to say that you were the only person to raise that, but it wasn't very common. Like I think in our survey we specifically, are there different neighborhoods where it's more appropriate? We didn't get a whole lot, and then even like when we come to define neighborhoods, we felt like, well, they're broad enough, but it's still, they could be local or not. Like we said, well, Blue Water gets 4 or something, right?
But
Is
it
that,
depends, like for instance, if you go to the more rural properties,
yeah,
you can park cars so easily. You can have, you have far less impact on your neighbors.
yeah.
So, what I'm saying is that if you say it is conditional on a per application basis, or you use some kind of vehicle to not say that formula works everywhere. Like what Danielle said, let's say if you have a place and you need some more, you build some secondary suites, like 4 or 5 of them, and they're small, and you need it for your farming operation, and one day they will be rented out, and anybody can use it for whatever purpose. But then, it goes back to if you build the small spaces and the flexible use.
Okay, so I would, if we can
it's
copy and
fun.
paste from the last one, I
Yeah.
do the
Yeah.
whereas,
Right,
the
yeah.
Housing Advisory Committee, blah, 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 blah. So-
Oh, we're gonna do the exact same?
Well, why not?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
So
if
like
it's
A
a.
motto.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think, and again, I'm happy to edit that statement, but it's like, I want that to be like, this is what our committee's doing.
Yeah.
We are trying to create more diverse housing options with an emphasis on low and middle income households. So,
Yeah.
one of the comments, so let's see, that has to be probably comments. Yeah,
Could you flip that first point? Could you start with, that a mechanism be identified to incentivize
Incentivize
long-term rentals? Get that first,
yeah, incentivize,
long-term rentals.
Are you okay with me capitalizing that? Jennifer used the term LTR.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah, long-term rentals.
Rentals of secondary suites and retired dwellings?
Or just
Long-term
long-term
rentals.
rentals.
Just long-term rentals,
Okay.
period. I would say almost period.
And then a new bullet.
And a new bullet point, find opportunities to,
Tools.
yeah, identify tools or make use of tools when available, if and when they are available. And penalize is too strong a word, but is de-incentivize, is that,
Yeah.
or it's kind of awkward,
De-incentivize, I think
Or
is.
discourage.
Right.
discourage, yeah, that's a
Okay,
great
yeah,
word,
yeah.
thank you, Allison. To make use of tools to discourage short-term rentals. Is that kind of what we're getting at?
Can you put some points
Let's-
in there of the income gain used for affordable housing?
So maybe
projects?
Yes.
in brackets, for example,
Mhm.
step in brackets, after right where you are, in bracket, for example, if an additional tax was available.
I think that should be a separate bullet point. The idea that some portion of tax on the short-term rental income would go towards the development of something housing. What did we just call it?
Non-profit
Affordable,
housing.
non-profit housing.
Well, I think that's what I was getting at, I think it's,
I just felt that it needed its own bullet point, that's all.
Let's just do a brain dump and get
Yeah,
all
sure.
the words out, we'll
Yeah.
fix the words
Okay.
after we do that.
Okay, so then I like the next one, that rezoning or TUP for entire dwellings be implemented to address commercial operations in a residential setting. I think that's appropriate. And then my other point, which is that the consideration of kitchen amenities be removed entirely. That's a pretty strong statement, because I know that's contrary to what I love, but happy for us to edit that, be removed entirely from from STR and LTR considerations. And then maybe in brackets, rationale being, we want to create as many potential rental units as possible and feel that limiting kitchen,
Okay, just
yeah, we
putting
want
that in
to
here, right?
create
Yeah, just
as
keep
many rental units as possible, and limiting kitchen facilities limits future use of these spaces.
Flexible future.
Flexible, okay?
And the quality of the use of the person using it as well, isn't it?
Just become big.
That's exactly what I do when I go on a vacation to Bowen Island. I want to bake some muffins. That's what I want to do.
It's a real small one, but as I've hardly used Airbnb, but 2 times that I've used it, I wanted a separate suite, I wanted separate kitchen there, so I don't have to go to a restaurant. You know, it's actually a benefit for me to have those things there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. For kids every night.
What about some of the basics? We support the
Yeah.
introduction of the MRDT.
Yeah, we support, okay, perfect. Of the MRDT to MRDT and
And
part, and
allocation.
allocating part of it towards affordable housing.
Can we put a timeline on that? I mean, just,
Well, no, I don't think we need to.
Okay.
Like, I'm pretty sure it's gonna happen.
Emma said that it would take about a year
Yeah, it's like a whole
for
thing,
the
you have to like,
application process.
yeah, you have to go
So-
to the province and demonstrate a budget.
So if
and,
you'd
but
like-
we've said adopting the policy and then we can start on.
Yeah, so if you'd like, then I'm happy to support the introduction of the MRDT as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Like, if you wanna
Yeah.
put the urgency on it. Yeah,
And if it could be part of it towards the Affordable Housing Reserve
Reserve
Fund.
well, yeah, that's a separate point, MRDT, or can it be in one sentence, or?
yeah, I
Yeah.
think,
Okay.
because it's the proceeds of that towards the Housing Reserve Fund. And then however that's used.
We put 50% as opposed to 10% is.
or like at, you know, are you saying at least 50% or like, I don't know.
Do
are
we
you-
want to be
right?
that specific? I mean, that's,
Or not?
in my personal thing, and I've written a letter from, wearing my birch hat, we've written a letter to council that we support a 50-50 split. Because,
Okay.
but as the Housing Advisory Committee, I don't know, do you guys have,
Well,
do
I
you
think
guys have a
it's better
different
to put
opinion?
it in, put it in.
Well, the tourism will make a strong plea for all the money going to them, because
Yeah,
historically
exactly.
this tax has been for has been a hotel tax. That's where it's grown out of.
So if I may, I'm pretty sure tourism in their most recent statement about this was happy for it to be shared. They did, I don't think they specified a percentage, but I'm pretty sure they said they acknowledged that it could be
So
shared.
let's get a figure on the table,
So
60%.
I'll let you guys, because I've already put mine out there wearing my different hats, so I'll let the rest of you guys decide if you want it to. Daniel's saying 60. Do Allison, Frits, do you feel that we need to specify a number, or what should that number be?
Well, there'll be a battle about it anyways, I think 50 is good.
I'm fine with that. Okay, you've been outvoted, is that all
That's
right?
fine, that's good. I've got a figure there, that's all I wanted.
Okay. Okay, great.
Can I ask them specifically in the short-term rental policy, it's like, you know, almost the main change is the idea of the introduction of some sort of seasonal rental where you can rent out a dwelling on a short-term
Yeah.
basis.
So-
I'd like, you know, comment from the committee if you support or don't support that
Do we
concept.
support the introduction, so if I've got it correct, the seasonal rental is that allows somebody to rent out an entire dwelling or potentially a secondary
Yeah.
suite, if that's the
Yeah.
way this goes, some sort of dwelling unit in its entirety for
Yeah.
up to 120 days a year. Are we in support of that as a housing committee?
I think it should be longer. The traditional way, as was explained, with holiday homes on Bowen, the family would come and use it for the 2 months of the summer, and then for the rest of the year, it would be rented out. I think we should leave that. I think there's value in that still being present.
But on that,
So now-
that was a long-term rental.
Then that's a long-term
model, right?
rental.
That was the
Okay.
traditional model.
If they rent, like, that's how I moved to Bowen, I got a summer people's house for 6-month lease.
Yeah.
And so, so I mean, but that isn't covered in
Okay.
this, because that's, again, if it's over 30 days, that's a long-term rental.
That points to one of the interesting things about this, what is not being covered by it, and sort of where all the different types of rentals fit into it. So that the fixed term lease
Yeah.
is what we're talking about here. You know, the summer is occupied and then there's a 10-month fixed term lease. And I think as people are trying to get their heads around it, that we need, as the policy goes forward, we need to have something clear and visual that helps you enable, understanding of how the spectrum works from like 1 month's occupancy up to the entire year's occupancy and what the category is.
I'm just looking at an article right here, which is a huge study on regulating Airbnb and what different cities have done. And they've got a marvelous diagram right here showing how,
Do you want to tell me the link?
okay,
I think
Or
that's,
something like that.
so is that something we're talking about here, is that just more feedback to Daniel that it would be useful to have,
Council has that.
okay, yeah, so a flow diagram or some sort of illustrative
Yeah.
infographic to explain to everybody what these different things are, because exactly, I think it's important to remember, anything over 30 days isn't in this category, that's covered under
Yeah.
something totally separate. This is, I don't know, do we need to, do
No,
we need
I
to
don't-
put this on? I don't think we need to,
Okay.
thank you.
But Steph, the other point more,
Yeah.
even without the 120 days, but just as a concept even from the committee in terms of like, do you support the idea that dwellings can be rented on a short-term basis for a portion of the year? Or for the entire, or
Yeah.
something like,
So if I can speak to it, I would say that yes, I support the seasonal rental with a maximum
Yeah.
limitation on the number of days and,
Length of time.
well, no, I think just we're in support of the seasonal
yeah,
rentals.
like Steph, that's what I more want, is like that the committee
Period.
supports.
And that there is a limit on days, you know, for
Yeah.
example, the 120 that's being proposed is appropriate. Because I think, if I just think through it, again, this is a way that to kind of, what word did we come up with? De-incentivize, sorry, I'm stuck on that word now. Discourage, it's a way of discouraging it. So like, if you come for 2 months and your house is empty for 10 months, you could either rent that out for 10 months long-term, or we don't, I think what we want is discourage people from renting it out for 10 months short-term, right? Night overnight, because they can make a lot of money, but,
That's a commercial use.
that's a commercial use, even if, which, you know, for 10 months of the year. So I think that some sort of limit, for example, the 120 days is appropriate. It says, okay, you rent it out in the summer, we allow you to rent it, or you live it in the summer, we allow you to rent it for some portion to make a bit of money, to help with the maintenance and the property. Like, I think that's reasonable and probably historically what's happened. And again, you don't want to penalize people for all those kinds of things, but having some sort of limit, like 120 days, is a fair balance, right? Between, you can make a little bit extra money, but you can't make a ton of extra money. And it may, in fact, work out more of a financial incentive to rent it long-term if you have that limit. You know what I mean?
You know, so I think like if somebody's just there in the summer, they're just the classic 2 months of the summer.
Yeah,
Then it's like, well, the goal should be find a tenant for 10 months, right? Because somebody can actually be there. It's more the people who are there, well, I'm there the summer and I'm there Thanksgiving and
Yeah.
Christmas, and there's not
Come
really
for
a
weekend
window
right
where I
there,
can move
and-
somebody
yeah.
in. So then we're like, okay, now you're using it to infill
Yeah.
your gaps, as opposed to when there's a huge gap where it's empty. It's like,
yeah,
there's probably a tenant you could find who's.
yeah, exactly, sorry. Yeah.
so what I'm seeing here is, for example, Barcelona, partial ban for new licenses in the Old Town. New Orleans, partial ban in New Orleans, and the restrictions are 1 party of guests per unit. Santa Monica, 1 visitor per property owner. San Francisco, maximum 90 unhosted nights. Berlin says no entire apartment, only allowed if at least 50% of apartment is used. Paris says quantitative maximum of 4 months a year, which is similar. London says a quantitative maximum of 90 nights renting per year. So that's kind of what other cities are putting in place.
I would rather have the 90 than the 120, I think.
Yeah, and I'm 120 sounds fine.
Amsterdam
Like, I'm
says
not
60
very-
nights.
Yeah, I'm,
Well, because that's still every weekend in the summertime, right? So for you know what I mean? For a neighborhood to get, if
Was-
you have a neighbor who constantly every weekend has
was the
different people,
120 days, like,
that's
was there a lot of, yeah, like,
There was a lot of discussion around
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Why was that number chosen?
so I'm thinking in our comments, I don't even
Lower
think we'll say the
number,
120, like, we agree with a limit, whatever that number is,
Yeah.
I think other people can come up with, but that it should be,
Yeah.
and maybe we could even put a rationale.
Where is that
Um,
thing?
I think down a bit.
I think the rationale is that the lower the number is, the more likely it is that it becomes long-term rental.
Yeah, and that's what I'm
So
thinking
why
of.
would we put in a high number at this
Yeah.
Can
time?
we go back to our thing? Let's
Yeah.
just skip that for a second,
Okay.
look at that later.
Mhm.
I think in the, where we say we support seasonal rentals of entire dwellings, but the number of days per year be limited, not commercial use of residential, that's not, I don't think,
Okay,
what we wanna say. We support seasonal rentals of entire dwellings, but that number of days be limited I think something along the lines of so that it's,
To a level that
To a le-
effectively encourages long-term.
perfect, thank you, to a level, that's exactly it, to a level that effectively encourages long-term rental.
Yeah.
Bracket 60, question mark.
You want a number again, you got your 50.
I actually
It's just nice talk.
It's not 120 for sure, because that, if you just say, a lot of people think to get all this money in the summertime, 120 days is the whole freaking summer. So,
Yeah,
like, this number is just way too high to support the last sentence. It should be probably half.
Can
or
that then
something.
be like a separate, next point down?
Next point
And you
down.
say 120 days is too, if that's the committee, 120 days is too long, and the committee would support a reduction in the proposed length to something.
Yeah, I think it's well, we're far
For
more
seasonal
acceptable to
rentals.
neighborhoods
Yeah.
to, you know.
oh, okay.
No.
Well, I think maybe just start that point with for seasonal rental, like just so that it's.
Yeah, so I
Oh,
think,
Yeah, just keep shouting at me, I'm just.
okay, for seasonal rentals.
It's fine.
So that we feel 120 days is likely too long?
No, it's not likely, this has to be more
Is too
definite.
long, okay.
just, Steph, you can just say 120 days, like, in terms of, it's the committee saying
No
it,
motion
so it's,
words?
everything, it should be what you feel or believe.
Okay, 120 days is too long if we are to,
To encourage.
to discourage
Short-term
short-term
rentals.
rentals and convert it to long-term rentals or something like that. Is that not quite the right words, but
I mean, if you
Can
can't.
you just copy what's above? It's too long to effectively encourage
to
long-term
effectively encourage,
rentals.
sure, yeah, okay, perfect.
I mean, if you have 120 days and
Encourage
the highest
long-term rentals.
in the season with the highest return, there's no point to rent it out at long term, period. So,
And then, does the committee want to give a number, or are you saying, like, 120 days is too much?
yeah, well, maybe 60
Well,
or.
can we, and sorry, we're running short on time, so I don't
I've got
know,
to go for the 11:45.
yeah, okay.
11:45.
So what, if we ran a really quick, if somebody's renting out a small suite for 120 a night and times 120, I don't have anything in front of me, what's 120 times 120, is it 14,400?
2,000 per hundred.
Yeah, and then what does that equal if they were to rent it out for,
Right, by-
let's
by
say
12.
9, well,
Oh,
but no, if it's they're occupying it
Gotcha.
partly, right? And maybe we're saying you could rent it out for those 9 months or whatever to a person over the winter or something. Could they get? what would
I
that
put
be?
30 nights. That's myself. I know that's low.
I go for 60.
The basement suite's going for $1,600 on bottom.
Right. So could we say, what are we at, 120? Could we say, you're saying 30?
I'm saying 30, just to
60.
really discourage
Do you
it.
have a number?
I'm happy to go with 30 because we're only tweaking the tail and someone else is going to decide.
Yeah, could we say 30 to 60?
30 doesn't even allow you to stay for the summer.
Well,
What do you mean?
so,
It doesn't.
The owner's going to be there for summer. It's-
Well, what do you mean to rent for the
It's
summer?
30 nights.
Oh, you're talking about the 120 additional
Yeah,
Yeah,
days.
yeah.
like how long it can be a short-term
How
rental.
long can it be short-term rental per year?
Mhm.
I personally think 30 is a little
It's
harsh,
45?
but, again, we're not the ones making the decision, right? We're just making suggestions, but should we say, 30 to 60 or 30 to,
And I mean, the
90?
committee, yeah, I was gonna say, the committee doesn't have, you don't have a definite number, you don't have to say, you're saying 120 is too long, or you can try to, if you have a number you feel like is
Yeah.
appropriate, you could give it, so.
what would be useful for council, do you think, Maureen? Like,
Just saying it's too long.
it's too long.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think they can, again, people can do math, you could probably do a few scenarios and show some numbers. And I think I think we've said to effectively encourage long-term rentals, that's what we want to do. It should be that it's you're being penalized
Yeah.
for renting short-term and you should be encouraged to do long-term, even if it's a 6-month rental, because that.
So at 30, if you rent out 100, at 120, you'll make $3,600, which isn't enough to make it viable for most people. They'll go, this is not worth
Right.
doing. If, on the other hand, you make it twice that, 60 nights,
Yeah.
at 120, you're looking at twice, that's sort of getting up to 7,600-ish.
Yeah,
Someone might say that's extra money, worth it, that's 60 nights.
yeah,
Much less than that is not going to feel viable, I think, to me.
yeah.
I think if we put people in too big too small a box,
Yes.
you'll get some serious kickback.
take back.
That's what I feel as well,
Or
yeah.
non-compliance or.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
like-
So I think, is everybody okay? I think we just say the 120 days is too long. I don't think we need to say
No.
what the number is. And I want to get, sorry, what's our time? Oh, we have 1 minute left before we want to wrap up. So let's go back to the top if we can, Steph, sorry. So our just so I can see what the, so our whereas at the top, Housing Advisory Committee provides the following comments on the short-term rental policy. That a mechanism be identified to incentivize long-term rentals.
I'm gonna need to edit this
Yeah.
myself, if that's okay.
Oh,
Unless
okay.
you guys have it, just for grammar.
We could do,
If you want to do it
maybe
now.
quick.
Okay.
Okay, that a mechanism be identified to incentivize long-term rentals, that use is made of tools so we can.
The tools be developed to discourage short-term
Yeah.
rentals.
Thank you.
The mechanisms to be identified.
The tools, mechanisms, whatever, I don't think it really matters. Yes, that tools be developed to discourage short-term rentals, for example, if an additional tax, I know we've kind of got a sentence there, if an additional tax mechanism is made available, something like that. Because that's what you're talking
Oh,
about,
was this
that was at
taxes?
UBC.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
It's
Such
a
as,
split
such as,
tax
such as-
mechanism,
such as, oh,
such as a split
yeah.
tax.
Such as a split.
I'm looking right now at VRBO, we were so off with 120. $750 a night, Bowen Island. 1,215 average per night.
yeah, and those are full buildings, right?
They are.
Good,
Okay.
let's focus.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
so that some portion of tax from STR income would go towards nonprofit housing, that rezoning and TUP for entire dwellings be implemented to address commercial operations in residential settings, that considerations of kitchen amenities be removed entirely from short-term rental and long-term rental policies. The rationale being we want to create as many rental units as possible, limiting kitchen facilities limits flexible future uses of these spaces. Support the introduction of the MRDT as soon as possible and allocating at least 50% of it towards affordable housing.
So what are we doing with that grammar though?
Hold on. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
As many rental units as possible.
Why don't we just, Danielle, I know you have to go. We'll keep working as long as people can stay. We're gonna be over time now. And then I think we email this out to the committee to say, is everybody okay with this before it goes to council? Is everybody okay to stay for a few more minutes so we're not panicking? Okay.
There's another morning, right? This morning.
Yeah.
So,
I think so.
So where are we up to? Where,
The kitchen facilities.
okay, kitchen
So
facilities.
rental units as possible and limiting kitchen facilities limits. Support the intro of the MRDT and allocate at least 50%.
And allocate, yeah, okay.
But we changed grammar there.
Right, you wanted to start
I
with
wanted
that.
to, or not, or,
That the MRDT be introduced
Yes.
as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Yeah, I said it on leave 45 for as well,
right, okay, gotcha.
and so they want 10.
And then go passive for the next one.
well,
Yeah, that's okay.
or polite.
Sometimes passive is appropriate.
Yeah.
In my industry, it's often appropriate.
Seasonal rental, I would try to well
It's
is
seasonal.
supported.
And that the number of, and that the number of days per year be limited to a level that effectively encourages long-term rental.
That,
Well, can that be a
120
bracket after the
less
last
than.
one, or
oh,
do you think it needs to be its own separate point?
oh, yeah.
No, I think you want them separate.
Okay,
One is
Yeah.
to support entire dwellings
Yeah.
and the other is for how long.
okay.
Um,
That season, I think you can be repetitive, that seasonal rentals of entire dwellings.
Undergo.
No, I think it's just that for seasonal rentals of entire
Okay.
dwellings, 120 days is too long, right?
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
that for seasonal rentals of entire dwelling, yeah, 120 days is too long to effectively encourage long-term rentals, okay?
Does the, I was gonna say, secondary suites,
Yeah,
And that's kind of come under, like, when you talk about kitchen stuff.
Yeah, so
but-
maybe we could even put it after the kitchen stuff, so up at that point. Enter that, with regard, is it with regards to the secondary suite bylaw? Or you don't have to be that specific? Because what we want to talk about is that in the land use bylaw,
Yeah.
under 3.54.3,
Yeah,
so should we be that specific in this?
yeah, and more I was thinking too about the specifically, like, should seasonal rentals be allowed in secondary suites?
Okay.
And if the committee says, well, that's okay, because we'd rather see secondary suites built and then used temporarily for seasonal rentals. Or
Yeah,
maybe say it as opposed to saying, we don't think any secondary suite should be used for seasonal rentals.
okay. So, and that's, because we've sort of said something about, yeah, I think that's the kitchen one.
Yeah,
So that with regards to secondary suites, seasonal rentals should be allowed in these spaces
yeah.
as we
Would-
want to, yeah.
Yeah, something like with sufficient regulation or something like that.
Yeah.
Controls or something. So you're saying it's not like
With
they're
sufficient
being.
regulations and controls, to again incentivize long-term rentals.
Yes.
And the logic of that makes sense, because if we're gonna be allowing whole houses, why wouldn't we
Why
be
wouldn't we?
allowing secondary
Yeah.
suites? So there may end up being a cap that we need to have quorum for the vote.
Oh, okay.
Please stay.
It's okay.
And just then the one other point being secondary suites, yeah, like you've said, that the committee recommends further changes to secondary suite
Okay.
regulations. So Steph, under that same, like the next point
So
down,
next
so
point down,
just make any bullet,
that,
yeah.
yeah. That the committee recommends
Yeah,
revision of the land use bylaw,
secondary suite
secondary suites
regulations.
regulations, and
To remove.
the, or to allow both B and Bs and secondary suites
Yeah,
on the
that
same
property.
property. And then the other one, yeah, okay. And then actually in the end, after the last point, can you hit enter?
Wait, macro says something.
Yeah, I know, but we talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's good.
The seasonal rental limit, whatever number of days, shall apply per property.
So what?
Shall apply per property, like per
Right, so
lot.
there's a house and a secondary suite
So,
on it,
yeah.
you get 120 days total.
Mm-hmm.
You could rent the secondary suite, short term, or the house, but
So,
it's
and
not,
then,
it's
yeah,
not
so
getting, you
in
don't get a
brackets,
staff.
not per
building?
building, yeah, not per dwelling,
Number
not per dwelling unit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Unit, so it's gonna be yeah, dwelling unit. Okay,
Wowzers.
has that captured, I know, because we talked about a lot, we should have started writing sooner. So I think we've emphasized we want to incentivize long-term rentals, we want to de-incentivize short-term rentals, the kitchen thing we've addressed, the commercial thing we've addressed. We've addressed the B&B of short-term rentals, that conflict. And I don't think we need to say anything else about any of the other stuff. I think that's a lot.
I think we can add one thing, that that if rental suites are designed, or that the design of rental suites
Yeah,
encourages homeowners to rent them out.
Could that be part of the kitchen
Well, it's kind of kitchen, but it's also like if
is that relevant to the short-term rental policy that they're looking at right now? Or is
um,
that more relevant to the land use bylaw?
Yeah, I can't.
Okay,
We'll
so I just want to make sure we're keeping it in the box, right? Because this is what council's looking for. They're wanting,
Yeah.
they're making decisions on this.
Yeah.
And I think a couple of these are contrary to what they've been saying. So it's like, I want to make sure we're in
It's
the
hard
box.
to digest.
And making sure, so Maureen, because you're our only council here, does that, our rationale and everything seems clear from the things that we're saying that are contradictory, like the kitchen thing and the secondary suites?
Yeah. I think there might be some reordering needed to just sort of cluster and make the flow work
Okay,
better, but maybe that could be done.
Yeah, we can do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
And
good.
sorry.
So, can we move, I'm gonna move that we do this resolution. Allison has seconded. Everybody present in favor? Yes, carried unanimously with the remaining members. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting, and everything we didn't get to will be on the next one. Thank you, everybody. That was two very big achievements today. Yeah, thank you.